Egypt, once united under the sun god Ra, now lay fractured. The Hyksos, foreign rulers, dominated the north from Avaris, imposing their will and gods on a proud people. The native pharaohs pushed south to Thebes, clung to their heritage, separated from their ancestral lands by the Nile, a border of humiliation. The Hyksos king, Apophis, elevated the god Seth, symbolizing chaos and insult to Egyptian tradition, while temples in the north decayed and tribute flowed to foreign coffers. Yet in Thebes, defiance simmered. The spirit of Egypt waited for a leader bold enough to challenge the occupiers. A storm was gathering, one that would decide Egypt's fate. In Thebes, whispers of rebellion grew louder. The royal house, led by Seqenenre Tao II, he who strikes like refused to accept foreign rule. Seqenenre, ambitious and visionary, began building a grand temple and fortress at Deir el-Balas, rallying his people and projecting Theban power. Apophis, wary of Thebes' resurgence, watched with growing unease as Seqenenre gathered loyal warriors and tested Hyksos' control. The peace was a facade. Both sides prepared for inevitable conflict. The fate of Egypt rested on the clash between a foreign king and a native ruler determined to restore his land. War was no longer a question of if, but when. Seqenenre's temple at Deir el-Balas was more than stone. It was a symbol of resistance and hope. 85,000 workers toiled for years, building not just a place of worship, but a fortress ready for war. Seqenenre led by example, inspiring loyalty as he walked among his people, sharing their struggles and dreams. The temple became the heart of Theban power, a military hub, a storehouse, a command center. Every stone laid was a promise of action, every wall a challenge to the Hyksos. The builder king was forging his thunderbolt, preparing to reclaim Egypt. Amid the construction, discontent brewed. 15 Hyksos craftsmen, impatient for the promised title of Master Mason, grew resentful. Their demands for early reward were met with Seqenenre's firm refusal. Honor and order would not be compromised. Frustration turned to conspiracy. Whispers of betrayal echoed in the temple's shadows. The craftsmen plotted to seize by force what they could not earn, threatening the very foundation of Seqenenre's vision. The seeds of internal weakness were sown, a crack that could be exploited. Danger now lurked within as well as without. In Avaris, Apophis wove a web of intrigue, seeking to destabilize Thebes from within. He exploited the craftsmen's greed, sending agents to fan the flames of dissent and infiltrate the temple workforce. The number 15 was no accident, mirroring the Hyksos' own dynasty. These infiltrators aimed to steal the sacred secrets that legitimized the pharaoh's rule, the master's word. Apophis believed possessing this knowledge would grant him true power over Egypt. The unrest among the craftsmen was a tool. The real target was the soul of Thebes. The battle for Egypt would be fought not just on fields, but in the shadows of its greatest temple. Of the 15 agents sent by Apophis, 3 were ruthless enough to turn a labor dispute into a deadly plot. Disguised as craftsmen, they planned to ambush Seqenenre Tao II and steal the sacred master's word. As twilight fell, the temple became a stage for betrayal, and the shadow of death crept ever closer. In the usurped capital of Memphis, the Hyksos king Apophis ruled not by divine right, but by force. An outsider in a land of ancient gods, he shocked Egypt by worshiping only Seth, god of chaos, rejecting the harmony of Ma'at and the entire pantheon. This spiritual upheaval set the stage for a clash with the Theban king, Seqenenre Tao II, who vowed to restore balance. In Thebes, sacred hippos were honored as living symbols of the goddess Tawaret. But Apophis, the Hyksos king, mocked this tradition, sending a messenger with an outrageous demand: silence the hippos, claiming their noise kept him awake in distant Memphis. The insult stunned the Theban court, leaving them to ponder how to answer such a brazen challenge. Apophis's obsession with the hippos was a veneer for a much deeper, more desperate hunger, the quest for forbidden knowledge. He knew the true source of a pharaoh's power was not just military might, but access to the secret rites and sacred words that conferred divine legitimacy. As a Hyksos, he was barred from these traditions. The priests of Amun-Ra at the great temple of Karnak, the oldest and most revered grand lodge of learning in the world, held these secrets tight. Karnak was more than a temple. It was a university of civilization where the mysteries of the cosmos, of kingship, and of the gods were studied and passed down through initiated bloodlines. Apophis wanted in. He tried to force the priests of the craft to translate the most sacred text for him, to reveal the secrets carved into the temple walls and hidden within ancient scrolls. He wanted the master's word, the divine utterance passed from Ra to Isis, which she used to resurrect her husband, Osiris. This word was the key to divine power, the ultimate password to legitimacy. But the priests steadfastly refused. They would rather face death than reveal the sacred knowledge to an outbreed, a non-initiate deemed unworthy. To do so would bring a curse upon their lineage for 4 generations, a divine punishment far more terrifying than any mortal king's wrath. Frustrated and enraged by their loyalty to tradition, Apophis resorted to brutal tactics. He would have the defiant priests beheaded in front of their brethren, hoping the grisly spectacle would break their resolve. He put their heads on sticks outside the temples as a gruesome warning to others who might defy him. Some terrified priests tried to save themselves by pretending to translate, feeding the Hyksos king fabricated stories and false secrets. But Apophis was not a fool. When he discovered their deception, he would have them executed without mercy. The courtyards of the northern temples ran red with the blood of priests, yet the true secrets remained locked away. This desperate, bloody quest for legitimacy was the true engine of Apophis's conflict with Seqenenre Tao II. He saw the Theban king, with his grand temple and his people's devotion, as the living keeper of the very secrets he craved. The hippo complaint was just a pretext, a way to provoke a conflict that he hoped would ultimately lead him to his prize. He believed that by crushing Seqenenre, he could finally seize the spiritual authority he lacked. Apophis did not just want to rule Egypt's land, he wanted to steal its soul, and he was willing to chop off as many heads as it took to get it. As the sun set over Thebes, a darker shadow crept through Deir el-Bala's temple. 3 assassins, disguised as craftsmen, waited in the shadows, ready to ambush King Seqenenre Tao II. The temple, once a place of worship, had become a hunting ground. Tonight, the king's devotion would become his fatal vulnerability. As the last rays of sunlight vanished from the horizon, Seqenenre Tao II began his final inspection, his mind filled with plans for the next day's work and the greater war to come. He was unaware of the predators lurking in the gloom. He made his way towards the south gate, intending to depart for his palace. As he approached the massive stone portal, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. It was the first of the 3 ruffians, his face a mask of grim determination. He held no obvious weapon, but his posture was coiled with aggression. The sanctity of the temple grounds was instantly shattered by his insolent presence. The assassin wasted no time on pleasantries. His voice, rough and demanding, cut through the evening quiet. "Give me the secrets of a master mason. Give me the master's word, or you will die where you stand." The demand was as shocking as it was audacious. It was a direct challenge not just to the king's authority, but to his sacred trust. Seqenenre Tao II, the striker, the warrior king, looked at the man with a mixture of disbelief and steely resolve. He had faced down armies on the battlefield, and he would not be cowed by a single insolent workman, regardless of the threat. The pharaoh remained silent. His refusal conveyed more powerfully than any spoken word. To even entertain such a demand was unthinkable. To yield would be to betray the gods, his ancestors, and the very soul of Egypt. The master's word was not his to give away. It was a divine trust he was sworn to protect with his life. His silence was a wall, an unbreakable vow. Seeing he would get nothing, the king turned, perhaps to call for his guards or to seek an alternative exit, his mind racing to comprehend the depth of this treachery. He did not yet realize this was not a lone malcontent, but the first move in a coordinated trap. Disdaining to fight a common laborer on sacred ground, Seqenenre Tao II rushed away from the south gate, seeking to escape the confrontation. He headed towards the west gate, believing he could exit from there and sound the alarm. His heart must have been pounding, not with fear, but with a righteous fury. Who were these men? How had they dared to profane his temple with such a heinous demand? He moved swiftly through the half-finished courtyards, the familiar shapes of his grand project now transformed into a bewildering maze of shadows and unseen threats. He was running from one killer directly into the arms of the next. As Seqenenre Tao II reached the west gate, his hope for a clear escape was brutally dashed. Another figure stepped out to block his path, the second of the three assassins. This man's expression was even more menacing than the first. In his hand, he held a mason's square, a heavy L-shaped tool of bronze or wood, used to ensure the perfection of right angles in the temple's construction. In this context, held as a weapon, the tool of creation became a symbol of profane destruction. The square, which represented the worshipful master's duty to keep the craft true and just, was about to be used in the ultimate act of injustice. The second ruffian repeated the demand, his voice laced with impatience. "You escaped my brother, but you will not escape me. Give me the master's word and grip, or I will take your life." Again, Seqenenre Tao was met with an impossible choice. He was a king cornered, his authority challenged by the very men he had employed to build his legacy. Yet, his resolve did not waver. The secrets were not his to barter. He was the guardian, the Grand Master, and his duty was to protect the integrity of the craft, even in the face of death. He likely gave the ruffian a look of pure contempt before attempting to bypass him as well. Enraged by the pharaoh's silent defiance, the second assassin struck. He did not hesitate. He swung the heavy square with all his might, not as a craftsman, but as a thug. The sharp angle of the tool smashed violently into the king's chest and jaw, a sickening crunch echoing in the twilight. The blow was powerful, designed to incapacitate and inflict maximum pain. The force of the impact would have staggered the king, shattering bone and tearing flesh. This was no longer a confrontation of words. It was a savage, physical assault. The very symbol of order and precision was used to bring chaos and injury. Reeling from the vicious blow, his chest ablaze with agony, Seqenenre Tao II stumbled away. He was wounded, but his warrior spirit refused to surrender. Every instinct screamed for him to fight, but he was unarmed, and his path was once again blocked. He turned and fled towards the last remaining exit, the East Gate, the most sacred part of the temple, the place of rebirth and new beginnings. He ran not as a coward, but as a king, desperately trying to survive, to overcome this treachery and bring the perpetrators to justice. He was bleeding, battered, and running on pure adrenaline, heading directly towards the final fatal encounter. Gasping for breath, clutching his wounded chest, Seqenenre Tao II stumbled towards the East Gate. Here, in the direction of the rising sun, he was met by the third and most ruthless of the assassins. This man held the grim tool of his fate, a heavy-setting maul, a large wooden hammer used by masons to set stones into place without damaging them. It was a tool of finality, of putting things in their proper place. In the hands of this killer, it would become the instrument of the king's final violent end. The ruffian's eyes held no pity, only the cold fire of his murderous mission. "I have you now," the assassin snarled, his voice a low growl. "Your defiance ends here. Give me the grip and password of a master mason, or die." Even in his wounded and desperate state, Seqenenre Tao II's spirit remained unbroken. He summoned his remaining strength and spoke, his voice perhaps weak from his injuries but firm in its conviction. "I did not receive it in that manner," he declared. "Neither shall I depart it in that manner." It was his final, magnificent act of defiance. He would not betray his sacred oath. He had lived as the Grand Master, and he would die as one. His resolute answer was the last thing the assassin wanted to hear. The ruffian's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. He had his orders from Apophis, and his own greed drove him. If he could not have the secret, he would have the king's life. With a furious roar, he raised the heavy maul high above his head. He brought it down with savage force, striking Seqenenre Tao II on the forehead. The king collapsed to his knees, his world exploding in a starburst of pain. The assassin struck again, and then a third time, the brutal percussive impacts crushing the king's skull. The great builder, Pharaoh Seqenenre Tao II, he who strikes like Re, fell lifeless to the stone floor of his own temple. The striker had been struck down. His blood pooled on the ground near the east gate, a dark stain on the hallowed place of new beginnings. The murder was complete. The three ruffians stood over the body of the fallen king, their mission accomplished in the most brutal way imaginable. A great silence fell over the temple, broken only by the panicked breathing of the killers as the terrible weight of their regicide began to sink in. They had not just killed a man, they had murdered a king and plunged Egypt into a darkness from which only blood could bring the dawn. The three ruffians panicked. They said, "We have killed the Grand Master, Seqenenre Tao II. They said, "Let's carry him out at the east gate and cover him with the stones and rocks until 12 midnight. We can then meet and carry him west and bury him." At 12 midnight, they meet up at the east gate of the temple. Seqenenre Tao II had not been uncovered. They said, "Now it's all safe." One of the ruffians said, "We must bury him immediately, for I fear he begins to smell a little already, and we shall be discovered. Let us take him up and carry him to the Mount of Thebes." This is the real name of the mountain, not Mount Moriah. They had already dug a grave there. They buried him in a shallow grave, 6 foot down perpendicular. A perpendicular is a line that makes an angle of 90 degrees with another line. 90 degrees is also called a right angle and is marked by a little square between two perpendicular lines. One of the ruffians said, "Let us mark his grave with this sprig of cassia. He stuck it in the ground by Seqenenre Tao II's head." They went on the run then to hide. They went to the coast of the Red Sea. The symbol marking his grave is a plant called Cassia fistula, commonly known as golden shower. Persian cassia, Indian laburnum, or pudding pipe tree is a flowering plant in the subfamily Caesalpinioideae of the legume family, Fabaceae. The species is native to the Africa regions of Asia. It was later brought to North America by the Nubians, who became known as Olmec. Cassia is a translation of the Hebrew word kidak, and once as the rendering of Ketsioth, but always as referring to an aromatic plant which formed a constituent portion of some perfume. Some people use it for erectile dysfunction, ED, hernia, bedwetting, joint pain, menopausal symptoms, menstrual problems. Cassia cinnamon is also used for chest pain, kidney disorders, high blood pressure, and cramps. People apply cassia cinnamon to the skin to repel mosquitoes. Keep in mind the word ruffian means assassin. They were clever artisans. After burying Seqenenre Tao II's body, they said, "Now we got to get a passage to Ethiopia," while the three ruffians were looking for their passage to escape. At 6 a.m. the next day, when it came for the work to start back, the master was nowhere to be found. The workers couldn't start their work without the worshipful master Seqenenre Tao II opening the temple / lodge. So the workers summoned for Kamose, Seqenenre Tao II's son. Thebes was plunged into shock and grief when the king was missing from his own temple opening. Into this sorrow stepped Kamose, the prince, his fury unyielding. When Kamose arrived, he asked, "What is the cause of all this confusion?" One of the fellow workers said, "Grand Master Kamose, your father is missing, and there are no plans or designs laid down on the trestle board for the craftsmen to pursue their labors." Kamose said, "What? My father is missing. My father always shows up to open his temple lodge. He never misses a day." He said, "Search the temple up and down to see, can he be found at once?" The brethren searched the temple. When they returned to Kamose, Kamose asked, "Have you found him?" One of the brethren said, "We cannot find him, my lord," shaking his head. Kamose said, "Where is my father?" He then said to the secretary of the temple, "Call the roll of the workmen and see if any of them are missing." The secretary of the temple checks the roll and returned to Kamose and said, "My lord, there is 3 workmen missing. Jubula, Jubilo, and Jubelum. They are the ones who didn't respond when their names were called out, which is the names they give for the three ruffians. They really were Jacobites. This wasn't their names because there was no J at this time, not even in Hebrew. We know their real names, in which I will not give at this time. So we will let them play with that for a little while longer. Wait, you know what? No more secrets. We will drop it on you. The three ruffians are the three oldest sons of Jacob or Jacob: Reuben, firstborn; Simeon, second; and Levi, third. Now, Jubileum, also spelled Giblin, Giblum, Gibelim, and Gibelim, was the original name they called them. Jubileum just mean fellow craftsmen. Another form of the word Jubileum is Chibilum, which means worthy master. Also the word Giblim, which means Gentiles. Jub-el really break down to Jub from the word Yah or Jah that come from Yahweh, El or Baal from the god Baal son of Enlil, and or Om from the god Om. Om is Anu, Elion, Elion, El, Elu, Rasiel the first, Akkadian An, also called An, Sumerian An from in sky, heaven, is the divine personification of the sky, supreme most high God, and ancestor of all the deities in ancient time. Keep in mind, these three ruffians were sent by Apophis, the ruler of the Hyksos. They were paid 11 pieces of gold each by Apophis. One of the brothers, a senior deacon, said, "My lord, this brings to mind a circumstance that took place this morning. 12 fellow craftsmen, clothed in white gloves and aprons, came to me and confessed that they, 12, with 3 others, had conspired to extort the master mason's word from your father, Grand Master Seqenenre Tao II, and if he refused, to take his life. The 12 had changed their mind about doing it, but they feared the other 3 had been stupid enough to carry it out. Kamose said, 'You will draw 12 fellow craftsmen from the banks of workmen, clothe them in white gloves and aprons. Send 3 of them east, 3 west, 3 south, and 3 north to search for these missing men at once. When they are found, cause them to be brought out front for mine eyes to see.' The 3 men returned from the south and said, 'We found nothing, my lord.' The 3 men from the north returned, 'We found nothing, my lord.' The 3 men from the west returned, 'We found nothing, my lord.' The 3 men from the east returned, 'My lord, we went east like you told us to do, and we found an old man who was dressed like a master.' One of the brothers said to the old man, 'Have you seen any travelers passing by this way?' The old man said, 'Yes, as I was down near the coast by the Red Sea this morning, I saw 3 men, and from their dress and appearance I supposed them to be men of Thebes and workmen from the Grand Temple. They sought a passage to Ethiopia, but could not obtain one without the master's key, in consequence of an embargo recently out on all shipping. I believe they returned into the country.' Kamose said, 'I had the embargo put on to prevent the fugitives from making their escape. You will go and search again, and search till you find them, if possible. If they are not found, the 12 who confess to have been originally in the plot must be considered as the killers, and shall suffer accordingly.' They went out south, east, north, and west again. Those who went west stopped to rest by the West Thebes mountain. One of them, as he rises up, he catches hold of a sprig of evergreen that had been stuck there. On a close examination, he finds that it has lately been broken off and stuck there. He called over the other brothers. They began to look down at the ground. They said, 'This looks like a grave.' The 3 ruffians were headed back to dig the grave up and move the body. The 3 brothers heard them coming and hid. They were talking about what they did and how they murdered Seqenenre Tao II, the Grand Master. The men that were hiding jumped out and seized them, taking them back to Kamose at once. They said, 'My lord, we went west back to the site where the brother found the sprig of cassia. We were about to dig and we overheard men coming. We hid and listened. We heard them talking about what they had did and how they murdered your father, Seqenenre Tao II, the Grand Master. We jumped out and seized them and had them brought before you and on await of your further orders.' Kamose said, 'Jubela, rise and face your accusers. You are suspected and accused of being accessory to the death of my father, the Grand Master Seqenenre Tao II. So, are you guilty or not guilty?' Jubela said, 'We were convinced by Apophis, the Hyksos ruler, to carry out this mission. Here is the gold in which he paid us. throwing it on the floor of the temple. "I am guilty, my lord." Kamose said to Jubela, "Hold up your head and hear your sentence. It is my order that you be taken without the walls of the temple, and there have your throat cut across from ear to ear, your tongue torn out by the roots, your body buried in the rough sands of the sea, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours. Jubelo, you are accused of the same offense. Are you guilty or not guilty?" Jubelo said, "I am guilty, my lord." Kamose said, "Well then, hold up your head and hear your sentence. It is my order that you be taken without the gates of the temple, and there have your left breast torn open, your heart and vitals taken from thence and thrown over your left shoulder, and carried to the valley of kings, there to become a prey to wild beasts of the field and vultures of the air." Kamose then said, "Jubalum, you are suspected of the murder of our Grand Master, Seqenenre Tao II. Are you guilty or not guilty?" Jubalum said, "I am guilty, my lord." Kamose said to him, "Hold up your head and hear your sentence. It is my order that you be taken without the walls of temple, and divided to the north and south, your bowels burnt to ashes in the center, and scattered to the four winds of heaven." They were carried off with violence and executed like the master Kamose ordered, but the executions were only the beginning. Kamose's wrath now turned north toward Apophis. Kamose then ordered them to retrieve his father's body. The fellow craftsmen went out to get the body. They dug him out. When they uncovered him, the smell was bad. They began to cover their noses. This was added as one of the signs. They tried using the fellow craftsman's grip to raise him up, but they couldn't. They went back to Kamose and said, "We found the body, but couldn't lift him up without the strong grip of a master." Kamose said, "How did they kill him?" One of the brothers said, "Looked like the enemy killed him by hitting him in his head." Kamose said, "We must lift him with the strong grip, the master's grip, the lion's paw." The pale man didn't know this part until he raided the tomb of the Grandmaster Mararuka. After his father's murder, Kamose called his nobles and commanders to council. The hall was heavy with grief and fear. Many urged caution, wanting peace and fearing the Hyksos. But Kamose refused to accept subjugation. He demanded action, vowing to rescue Egypt from foreign rule. Inspired, the council rallied behind him. Thebes would go to war. Kamose, with his council's reluctant blessing, launched a bold campaign down the Nile, leading his Medjay warriors in swift raids against the Hyksos. He captured Neferuzi, crushed traitors, and struck fear into Avaris. But after only 3 years, Kamose fell in battle, leaving Egypt's fate and vengeance on the shoulders of his younger brother, Ahmose. The death of Kamose left Thebes in despair. Into this grief stepped young Ahmose, crowned king at just 10. His mother, Queen Ahhotep, ruled as regent, keeping the rebellion alive. Ahmose grew up learning war and patience, preparing for the day he'd reclaim Egypt from the Hyksos. To defeat the Hyksos, Ahmose I knew he had to master their technology, chariots, and the powerful composite bow. He modernized his army, forging new weapons and training elite charioteers. Outfitted with superior bows, his soldiers gained a crucial advantage. Ahmose marched north, not as a rebel, but with Egypt's most advanced army ever, the Medjays. With his new army, Ahmose launched a relentless campaign, first seizing the fortress of Charu to cut off Hyksos reinforcements. He besieged Avaris, isolating the Hyksos and breaking through after years of brutal fighting. He beheaded Apophis, the Hyksos ruler. The Hyksos were in total fear, just like Ahmose's people were for 430 years. The Hyksos fled with their pants down, but Ahmose pursued them into Canaan, destroying their last stronghold at Sharuhen. The Hyksos were annihilated. Ahmose's vengeance and Egypt's freedom were complete. The Hyksos who were left and their goats were rounded up from all the last parts of the Holy Land, blindfolded, cable-towed, stripped of their metals and natural wealth. They were then put on ships by the Medjays and sailed to Europe. Some were taken on 2, meaning foot to the Caucasus Mountain, while the masters rode on 4, meaning horses and camels, driving them to the caves and hillsides. With the fall of Sharuhen, Egypt's long night ended. Ahmose I returned not just as a conqueror, but as a restorer of Ma'at. divine order and harmony. The two lands were reunited, temples restored, and the gods honored once more. Ahmose began rebuilding, reviving Egypt's greatness and forging a new era of unity and pride. The Theban rebellion is the story of one Afar family's unwavering determination. Seqenenre Tao, the seconds the Twa sacrifice, sparked a sacred struggle. Kamose's fiery campaign broke the Hyksos, and Ahmose I's victory founded Egypt's new kingdom. Their legacy, etched in stone and memory, shows how a proud people, led by those who refused to bow, rose from occupation to reclaim their destiny. The dawn always comes.